No! Hear any cheeping noises? That'll be the ducks that I'm hatching out in the other room. Right now I've got them underneath the heat lamp. They're getting warmed up after they've hatched because that was a really exhausting thing for them to do. And one of them's laying down in the towel and is kind of like a person, really. Is like, smacking his lips and like a lazy person would do when they're resting after a lot of hard work. It's kind of cute. Actually, they're really cute. They're even a little bit cuter than the geese that I hatched out, which I took down to the farm. This is a few subjects that a lot of people wanted me to discuss, pole shift and black holes and dark matter. And fundamentally, before starting out on this discussion, it doesn't matter if you're a theist or a materialist or, what sort of deity it is that you cleave to. You're fundamentally insulting that which you hold dear or divine or supreme, as well as insulting yourself, to think that nature could in any way, shape, or form be represented at all, even closely, by the stuff that if you go to the science and physics section, and I grew up reading all of that stuff, the really, really heavy stuff, not the simple stuff. The things that these quacks, I got real quacks in the other room, the little web-footed quacks, but the quacks with paperwork hanging on the wall, tell you that nature is like. I mean, it can't work that way. The center doesn't hold. The center, I've been asked by people, so what do you mean does the center hold? I mean, it's a premise is if you're talking about something, everything points to it accurately at whatever vector, if not multiple vectors. The science and physics that we were taught to believe, says, well, this is the truth, but this is also the truth, and that's it. The center not only doesn't hold, there's 1,000 different centers that all mutually contradict each other. And this is what is meant by does the center hold, and it doesn't. Nature, of course, has no idea what science and physics are. Only thing nature knows is simplex pressure mediation. This is fields and energy and the pressure and the mediums thereof. The medium of great music, for example, of course, is frequency and vibration of oxygen and nitrogen that we breathe. I mean, that's the medium. The medium of everything we actually see out in the universe, either with our bare eyes or with a telescope, is, of course, the medium of the ether. I mean, ether perturbation modality, which, of course, is what a field is. Fundamentally, you can actually tell what something is by its geometry. There's really only two geometries, but there's a third one. I can call it the plane of inertia, but it also, too, goes by other names. More specifically, the accretion disk. And, of course, all spiral arm galaxies are nothing other than the ejecta matter given enough time to bake, if you will, of the ejective supermassive black holes. And of course, black holes is completely a nonsense term. I'd like to talk about black holes here in a second. But everybody asks about pole shifts, and I think the reason why, actually I know the reason why everybody talks about it is because there's a few YouTube channels like, oh no, doom and gloom, the poles are about to shift. When was the last time the pole shifts? Yeah, pole reversals are, of course, common. We've had 183 pole shifts in the past 83 million years. It's been, 780,000 years since the last pole shift. These are actually recorded in ferromagnetic rock strata, and you're actually able to accurately determine how many there were and when the last one was and the time before that with a great deal of certainty. Of course, nearly every child is familiar with the precession or wobble of a gyroscope. Once it's spun up, and a high-quality gyroscope with extremely low friction bearings will start to precess more and more. I got a low-friction gyroscope here. They're better than this. I used to have one. It's even better than this. Start to precess more and more, and of course the entire gyroscope will actually literally flip over. And if it's a really low-friction gyroscope, it'll actually flip again. This precession, of course, is the basis for the Earth's flipping of its magnetic poles. People say, well, the Earth being molten, we know you can't hold a magnetic field with molten iron. That's the other question. Myself and George Mizell said many years ago, he goes on YouTube by Super Magnet Man. He's the largest seller of permanent magnets in the United States. Is a guy that I know. We both correctly have said that the Earth's magnetosphere is not emanating from the Earth. It's rather due to solar induction, actually. Pole-to-pole vector, of course, of a torus is the three-dimensional force vector. The centrifugal force vector, the extrapolation of the torus or the donut shape from the center of same. Of course, the center of a donut, there's nothing there, but I mean that, of course, is rest. Center of the donut, of course, getting to the point of a black hole is literally the hole of the donut, but we're not interested in discussing that right this particular second. Pole reversals, of course, as I said, 183 times past 83 million years. People say, well, we're long overdue. And, oh, doom and gloom. Of course, the people that are spreading the doom and gloom are various YouTube channels talking about, you know, the end of everything. We're right on the precipice of the poles reversing. It's kind of what they've been saying for the past 2,000 years. Like, oh, these are the end times, and, you know, our Lord and Savior is coming back. It's going to be any day now. There have been signs. And that's what a lot of YouTube channels, unfortunately, have actually been spreading. There are countless examples of this flipping. You could see it in an example of a gyroscope or motorcycle wheels. This, of course, is called the Lamore frequency or gyromagnetic precession. And it's absolutely perfectly natural. Why everybody's worried about it or concerned, I find quite amazing, but I know where they've actually been getting, you know, the fear from that from, and that's other YouTube channels, and of course they use that for clicks and whatnot. But this is also too called the Lamore frequency. It's gyromagnetic precession. It's the natural torque, or you can also call it magnetic torque. It's the toroidal force vector of the torque induced. And the sun, I know the sun's magnetic field flips on a rather regular basis, essentially every 11 years. But I don't think a lot of people consider the path that the Earth takes around the sun, and the fact that the sun's flipping and the magnetic induction from the sun, which is where the Earth's magnetosphere comes from, builds up that torque. So we actually have a system of more than one thing. In the case of a gyroscope, it's really simple. We can actually spin it up and watch it start to precess, and I think everybody on Earth has actually seen that. And if it's a low friction, it will actually flip. And this is the actual lag induced in the system of the Lamore frequency. You actually have a lag between the North Pole and the South Pole. We have, of course, a magnet is a polar object, obviously so, and you actually apply that to a polar molecule like water, and you get drastic results. People say, why? And Rawls and Davis, you could download their books on the magnetic system and the secrets of life. Their books are rather hard to get a hold of. And why is there such drastic difference, like on seed exposure, for example, between North Pole and South Pole? Well, there's actually a phase disparity between the North Pole of a magnet and the South Pole of a magnet due to that lag. And then it equals out basically like the shape of an egg. We all know an egg has a fat bottom. It's kind of shaped like that. Well, you take the top portion, has a volume of 1. You take the bottom half, has a volume of phi. And you end up with lag. And you also, too, end up with visible disparity. When you actually shine it underneath the ferrocell, you actually see redshift disparity on the north end, and blue shift phase disparity on the south end. I can actually tell, you know, no matter how the magnet is put underneath the ferrocell, which is the south end, which is the north end. It's like, well, that side is blue shifted and that side is red shifted. So this is a three-dimensional pressure mediation, which is really hard for people to wrap their mind around, that is induced in the toroidal the magnetodielectric toroidal system of either the Earth's magnetosphere, which is due to solar induction, and the gyromagnetic precession, and actually goes by the Lamore. And by the way, this is how super expensive MRI machines are actually calibrated. They get a more sharp image by actually tuning the MRI machines so that the imaging is correct relative to the precessional frequency of phase disparity on magnetic pole shift when they actually pulse living tissue which is what's usually done on their MRI machine. You know, 99% of the time when you go to a hospital, you get an MRI. Those machines are, of course, radically expensive, and they have to be calibrated, and they actually calibrate the Lamore frequency to get the highest clarity of image. It actually took quite a long time for them to figure out how to get maximum imaging out of an MRI machine. And the better the imaging, the better determination, for example, on the tissue, what it is they're looking at in the hospital, but that's a matter for another discussion, of course. But a pole-to-pole vector of a torus, of course, is from force back to rest. And, you know, to travel from one pole to another and back again, you have constructive interference and destructive interference. There is a lag. This is that three-dimensional force vector and the necessitated resultant. You know, when this is present, that is present. The three-dimensional force vector necessitates this lag. Well, that lag necessitatively generates something else, and that's geomagnetic precession, or torque, which of course is the reason and basis, and it's 100% natural for the Earth's magnetosphere to flip. And it's nothing to be concerned about, and none of us, to be sure, are going to be around, you know, when that happens. I mean, definitely, to be sure, we're not going to be around. As often as every 10,000 years or so, and as infrequently as every 50 million years, there has been a pole reversal. And like I said, the last one was 780,000 years ago. Getting into energy, I've always been, you know, even at an early age, you keep hearing, I've heard this and you've heard this, that energy is never created or destroyed. And this is absolutely not true. Most people don't have the correct definition of energy. They think of force energy as actual energy, but it's not. It's the opposite of energy. It's the immanency of energy. True energy, of course, is rest. In cases of destructive interference, and Eric Dollar has actually talked about this, and you can read about this in James Clerk Maxwell's writings. Charles Proteus Steinmetz, actually. Of enormous amounts of energy lost in the early days of energy transfer. I mean, it didn't ground out anywhere. It literally vanished, and this is an example of perfect destructive interference. Of course, that's really, really bad for the energy grid if you send enormous amounts of electricity from point A to point B, and it's nearly all of it's lost. It's like, where did it go? And people think that, and of course they misconceive energy completely. But it's like, where did it go? I mean, it vanished down the rabbit hole of counter space. When we talk about a ground or an electrical ground, and I have a copper rod about 6 feet drilled into the earth outside my window, where I had my ham radio set up to ground out spurious noise, and also too for potential lightning strike. Well, there's a lightning storm going on right now. When we say ground, we're not talking about anything different than counter space. You could say zero-point energy or counter space is kind of a weird word, but I mean, a ground is nothing other than 0 point. We're talking about the complete dissipation of energy down the rabbit hole of rest. In the case of destructive interference, where the energy, massive kilowatts of energy in the early creation of our power grid, were lost completely. And, you know, they didn't burn things and scorch things, as often is the case today if something goes wrong. They were completely lost. And there's no evidence of what they were transformed into. So I've always known that this statement that people keep repeating, energy is never created or destroyed, it's only transformed. It's like, well, you have the word energy upside down and backwards. And the energy that you were talking about in the case of electricity, you know, vanished down the rabbit hole of counter space. You can't point to where it went. But once again, these people are confusing force energy with rest energy. And rest energy has no spatial vector, and it can't be measured with any electrical equipment whatsoever. You know, what's the rest energy of sound? You know, that would be undisturbed air. Of course, the air is moved around by wind, and of course, right now it's being moved around and vibrated with a set frequency because of my voice. But I mean, how do you, I mean, if you put a microphone in a perfectly silent place, which basically doesn't exist, you know, it's like, where's the energy at? In this case, we're talking about a medium that's undisturbed, you know, a completely silent room. I mean, there are special places that we've created that are mega soundproof. They're insulated to the ninth, and it's interesting, if you actually sit in there, you get disturbed and you start having audio hallucinations people have when they sit in these super special rooms where all sound is absorbed and there's nothing to be heard. I mean, what are you going to record? The same is true of rest energy. And of course, sound is a medium of the air. The air is completely undisturbed. I mean, it's totally silent. There's nothing to be measured. Same is true of rest energy or the ether. I mean, everything, of course, is based in the ether. You actually have to have a medium. Getting on to black holes, and I'd like to talk about dark matter, which is very, very hilarious. Black hole, of course, is no different than the center of a donut, like I said, and there's nothing actually there. You know, matter is the donut. If we take that analogy, people say, well, you're using big words. Like, I'm never, ever, ever intentionally using any big words, and I'm trying to avoid any big words in this video. But, I mean, anybody can understand that, you know, nobody eats anything in the case of the donut other than the donut. Well, matter is the donut. The threshold matter, which we call a black hole, of course, is the hole. And we can technically call the hole an anti-donut, but there's nothing there to eat. And, of course, there's no donut there, and it's completely immeasurable. But we define the donut by its hole. Well, not necessarily always, but by its size. Well, let's not take that analogy too far. But a black hole is not a hole, rather a counterspatial sink. Counterspatial sink in a field modality, wherein which dielectric acceleration towards counterspace or zero-point energy, or you could just refer to the ether, of course, has utterly overthrown magnetism's ability to keep any and all matter in the visible universe of mass and magnitude. There's a lot of idiocy out there that actually say, oh, black holes don't exist. Well, not only, well, exist is almost an incorrect term, because exist means spatio-temporal. So black holes don't really exist, not in our conventional ideation of exist, of course, but not to take that too far in the word exist, but these entities, whether we call them black hole or whatever, I call them a counterspatial sink, they are real. Not real in a conventional sense, of course, but by definition, they must exist. I mean, these are point source gravity wells. They are literally an anti-mass. Only magnetism, and this is the most important thing, and I can call myself a genuine guru on magnetism, most certainly. The only thing that keeps anything in the visible universe is magnetism. Mass and magnitude, yeah. Human beings don't have any idea of a supermass that has no magnitude. Well, it's a point source of mass and magnitude which has reached a threshold. And the threshold is that dielectricity has overthrown magnetism's ability to keep that mass and magnitude within the visible universe. So, and people can't wrap their brain around something supermassive that has no Cartesian vectors of magnitude whereby which it can be measured. But I mean, this is what a so-called black hole certainly is, obviously and logically so. So, you know, the countless people say, oh, black holes don't exist. Well, they do exist, and definitionally they have to. That's like saying, well, all of the universe is magnetism-based. Well, that's impossible. Magnetism is the dielectric field. That's like saying ice is the field of water. It would be stupid to think only ice exists. It's like, well, you know, there's water. What if you lived on a frozen planet? No, there's no such thing as water. There's only ice. Well, that's just crazy. Things with magnitude that are measurable and palpable is due to magnetism only. Yeah, well, there's a conjugate universe of magnetism and dielectricity. Magnetism, of course, is the force and motion centrifugal vector of the toroidal geometry that actually defines all mass and matter. But when dielectricity overthrows that, then it vanishes from this visible universe. Infinite density, when they actually talk about black holes, of course, doesn't exist either, since density is a spatial measure. Spatial measure, of course, of magnitudes. Black holes are actually absorbing matter, of course, into antimatter. Not antimatter in the conventional sense. Regular antimatter, of course, is just inverse phase matter. But genuine antimatter, because it has no magnitude anymore, and every definition of its atomic scale, whether it be hydrogen or helium or any other matter, has been completely lost. But due to galactic jets, or also too called astrophysical jets or relativistic jets, same thing has three different names: astrophysical jets, relativistic jets, and galactic jets are all exactly the same thing, ejecting out trillions and trillions of tons of hydrogen. Galactic jets or astrophysical jets, these are the opposite of a black hole, of course, is what? What's the opposite of a black hole? Well, the opposite of a black hole is just conventional matter. This is what galactic jets are. Go look up galactic jets or astrophysical jets. So these are not holes, and calling them black, you know, like, well, relative to what? Emitting light? Well, they are emitting light. Every black hole is emitting light. What? I never heard that before. Is that a white hole? No. Every black hole is emitting light. The light that's being emitted is threshold boundary light. In other words, the electromagnetic radiation has reached the threshold of non-propagation, and then this is what we call hydrogen. All these black holes are emitting out super, super, super high energy light. The real white hole, people say, well, the opposite of a black hole is a white hole. Well, the opposite of a black hole is what they're emitting. Trillions and trillions of tons of hydrogen. Go look that up, by the way. That is light. It's just super, super high energy light. That, of course, is the reconciliation of light and matter. This is point source gravity. This is literally an anti-mass because, of course, mass equals gravity, but the gravity that we think of conventionally relative to conventional matter, this is where dielectricity overthrows magnetism. This is where we're talking about water instead of ice. That's kind of a crude analogy, unfortunately. Magnetism, of course, dominates matter. Dielectricity dominated matter, where magnetism is overthrown, is, of course, point source matter. This is also, too, the same explanation in light, where the smaller the space is the higher the capacitance. Power, in the case of fields and energy, is the smaller it gets, the higher the capacitance or the higher the energy. We think things bigger, more, better. Well, in the case of fields and energy, the smaller, because what is smaller is closer to rest energy, i.e. the ether. This is the actual white hole. The galactic jets, the astrophysical jets, the relativistic jets, all of those are one and the same thing. There's just three different names for the same thing. Those are the white holes. That's what these black holes are actually emitting. Regurgitated, reprocessed matter. Takes in matter, crushes it, magnetism is overthrown, but at the axis of geomagnetic precision, they're emitting out trillions and trillions. I mean, this is absolute simplicity and divinity in an angelic level of simplicity of Mother Nature. I don't care what deity you think, did this. I mean, that's the center must hold. Everything that I talk about in magnetism, black holes, light, smaller the space, the higher the capacitance, the conjugate geometry, everything that I've ever said in thousands of videos, the center holds and it points to the same simplicity. Absolutely everything. And that's the only way it can work. The only way. It can't exist any other way. Simplicity is divinity. Black holes, of course, have accretion disks. Yeah, well, in every branch of science, black hole accretion disk, you guess it. Well, at the plane of inertia, that is the accretion disk. The coalescing of these accretion disks, these are called galaxies. No one's ever said that before, and it's that simple, and that's, of course, the correct answer. Every galaxy is an accretion disk of one or more black holes, supermassive ones. They're emitting out trillions and trillions and trillions of tons of hydrogen. All matter, all atoms are compounded hydrogen. So this makes perfect sense. A black hole only has two geometries, a singularity and an accretion disk. An accretion disk is no different than saying the plane of inertia. I told everybody many years ago, before they actually showed up with a real picture of a black hole, that a black hole would look like the ferrocell image, the image underneath the supercell. And that's exactly how it turned out to be. That's because I understand the primer of nature. And it is really, really simple. I keep humorously referring to the hairy armpit of Mother Nature. She's a hairy armpit chick with a hemp skirt. It's really that simple. I don't care what deity or Mother Nature, take your pick. I don't care if you're a theist or a materialist. That's what an atheist actually is. And whatever you do, don't ever call me an atheist. Don't ever do that. There's a real insult. It has to be that simple. The complexity and the buffoonery of academia The people of science and physics. It can't work that way. The center doesn't hold in their systems, which are convoluted and self-contradictory. In the case of dark matter, these aren't my words, these are their words, by the way. So, well, we call it dark matter. Their words, not mine. We call it dark matter because of this. We know it's matter, and we call it dark because we don't know what it is. That's true. You can go look that up. They admit that. I'm glad they confess that. They will say, well, 5% of the universe is actual matter, 27% is dark matter, and 68% is dark energy. When they say dark energy, what they're actually referring to is the ether. Dark matter is massless matter of counterspatial sinks. When they're actually talking about dark matter, they're talking about black holes. They're talking about matter, we all agree upon matter. Say, well, there's 68% of that stuff out there, we don't know what it is. Well, that's the ether. That would be the field. That would be like the microphone and the perfectly silent. Well, there's nothing here. It's just because it's perfectly silent. Of course your microphone ain't picking up nothing. Everything is at rest. That is true energy, by the way, is rest. Pure, sheer potential. It has no Cartesian value or footprint. It can't by definition. Antimatter is just inverse phase matter. Do you know these people agree that all neutrons are spontaneously decay into a proton after 15 minutes? This means a neutron is a neutral charged proton. Every expert in field theory via Tesla, Dollard, Steinmetz, Heaviside, on and on, they all say there's no such thing as an electron. The principle of an electron is real. By the way, correctly what an electron is, as J.J. Thomson said, is 1 unit of dielectric induction. Very, very accurate. Not a particle, 1 unit of dielectric induction. When you talk about dielectricity, we have to talk about energy. And unfortunately, no branch of science has ever defined the term energy. Because they can't. Because they're atomists, they can't define energy because they think everything is a bumping particle. I call this the cult of bumping particles, which is what it is. The center must hold. Black holes, pole flipping, dark matter. By the way, you know the Greeks actually said in Plato's Republic 509d to 511, the accurate representation of matter versus what they're calling dark energy, which is the ether. According to the divided line section, it breaks down, not to get too complicated, I can actually elaborate on that later, that the invisible, or what they're calling dark energy, represents 3.618 totality of the universe. And visible matter represents 0.618. Well, this ancient equation of 1 over phi to the power of negative 3, or phi, 1, 1, and 1 over phi, accurately is a representation of everything we see out there. In other words, everything we think is real is the unreal in a super, super tiny fraction of the universe. As said, 0.618 visible matter. Rather, everything else, the ether and matter, as far as the universe is concerned, 3.618. Oh, nearly the same proportions as the academicians referring to dark energy. When they say dark energy, what they're really referring to, of course, is the ether. Simplicity is divinity. If you want me to go deeper down the rabbit hole on this, I certainly can. If I were to really go down, I think I might start to bore the heck out of people. I hope I haven't done that in this video. If you ever want to contact me, my information is in the description below. Any donations always warmly welcome. Let me know if you'd like me to go further down that rabbit hole. Thank you, and have a lovely day. Man, there's lightning outside like crazy. I love a good lightning storm, except when the power goes out.